Everyone loves a top 10 list, myself included, which is why I'm going to do my top 10 books of the year, even though the year's not done yet. Welcome back, thanks for tuning in, and if you're new here, it's good to have you. I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite books that I've read so far in 2026. At the end of the year, of course, I will do my top 10 for the entire year, but I've already read like 35 to 38 books, somewhere in that territory, enough that I feel like it's already difficult to narrow it down to 10 books because I've read a lot of great books so far. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to start with 2 honorable mentions. I always like to cheat and actually have more than 10, but I'm going to try and limit myself. We're just going to do 2 honorable mentions for now. My first honorable mention is The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sun Yee Dean. This is her second book. She wrote The Book Eaters a couple of years ago, and I didn't love The Book Eaters. It was kind of an uneven experience, but there was something to it. There was some cool ideas. It was weird. Sun Yee Dean is good at like dark fantasy atmosphere. And there's something about her writing that was compelling enough that when this came out, I knew I really wanted to try it. And I'm glad I did. This was better, in my opinion, than The Book Eaters, though initially I wasn't sure if that was going to be the case. This is the story of Mercy Chan, who is a ghost talker living in Kowloon, the walled city, in the 1970s in British-occupied Hong Kong. Kowloon is a fascinating location. It's this super densely populated city district. All these like buildings and units all stacked atop one another to the point where it's almost its own little ecosystem, and you can see pictures of the walled city online and what it was like going between these buildings and in its various levels. Like a really fascinating location. And so it was cool to read a story that took place within this city. Now, this story also partly takes place through some flashbacks to the 1940s during World War II era China and some of the tragedies that were happening from the war. And then, of course, a lot of the devastation is what led to there being ghosts and trauma in this walled city of Kowloon. And Mercy Chan is a ghost talker. Her ability is just that. She can talk to ghosts, and she uses that mostly for investigative purposes. And so in this book, a serial killer appears, like murders start happening in Kowloon, and Mercy Chan is hired to try and figure out what's going on because it seems like there are ghosts related to what is happening. And I won't say anything more than that because I feel like this plot does some interesting things that would be spoilers to get into. The first half of this book, even though I liked the setup, I liked the atmosphere of Kowloon, I liked some of the plot, it felt like I wasn't fully vibing with it, and the flashbacks weren't quite working for me for a while, and it was hard to see what this book was driving towards. I didn't have a super strong emotional connection to any of the characters for the first half of this novel. But as you pass the halfway point, Sun Yee Dean starts to weave the story together, and things do come together in a way that I think is both really interesting from a plot perspective, but also there was some emotional impact of the characters and what was going on and like how all of their stories tie together. And ultimately, like some of the themes that I think worked really well with the structure of this novel. And so this is one of those things where you got to get to the end of it, and then I think you'll see what the book is. And I like the book better looking back than like that first half was a bit of a struggle. But after that, it was pretty interesting, and I really liked it. And like, again, the ending of this very much will stick with me. If I had one other criticism, it's just that I wish that Kowloon had been drawn out a little bit more. Kowloon is such a unique and vivid location, and while I think Sun Yee Dean did a good job making it somewhat evocative as various scenes were happening in the city, it never like really took root inside me the way some great locations do, like Manderley in Rebecca, or like the Shire, or Rivendell in Lord of the Rings. Things like that, where a location really just like burrows inside you and like you feel like you could almost live there. I didn't get to that point with Kowloon, and I feel like there was an opportunity for that to be more the case. That being said, it was still good. It was still fun to like have a story set in Kowloon. But ultimately, yeah, I think the ending of this book made up for it. It was a lot of fun. I definitely recommend you check out The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sun Yee Dean. My other honorable mention, I don't know if this thing will stay up. My other honorable mention is Chess Story by Stefan Zweig. This is a story about a chess master who is traveling via boat from New York to Buenos Aires. And as he is doing that, he's playing chess with other people on the boat. And our point of view character challenges him and loses. And as this whole like spectacle of this chess master playing people is happening, a mysterious man appears and challenges this world-renowned chess master, and seems like he is maybe a match for the chess master. And this story is about who is this man? What is his backstory? Why is he so good at chess? And that story behind that was so compelling and interesting. And I didn't know what to expect from this. Like, I'm not a chess guy. I wasn't sure what could be compelling about this. And I don't want to say what it is because I think it's worth reading it. It's certainly not exactly what I expected it to be, but I think the story behind what's happening in from this mysterious chess player is so interesting and thought-provoking that it's totally worth reading. It's super short. It's like 80 pages. You can read this easily in a single sitting or two. So yeah, check this out. All right, on to my top 10. This is in no particular order. I will do a ranked video at the end of the year and make it harder on myself, but for the roughly midway point, I'm not going to rank these. These are just all somewhere in the top 10. There Is No Anti-Memetics Division by Quantum is a cosmic sci-fi horror, a mind-bending novel. If you've played the video game Control, this is giving incredibly strong Control vibes in a great way. And from what I've heard, Control might have even been somewhat inspired by the origins of this book. So There Is No Anti-Memetics Division was originally a series of like short stories published to, I think it's the SCP Foundation, which is like a website with like supernatural, sci-fi, paranormal type stuff. I never really read any of this stuff. I've just been finding out about it since reading this. But apparently Quantum was one of the contributors to that website, and some of his stories are what he eventually turned into this full-length novel of There Is No Anti-Memetics Division. Pretty interesting. That being said, this is a story of cosmically unfathomable entities that the government is trying to deal with that are like threats to humanity that we can't even really understand. One of which is this idea of an anti-meme, something that literally your memory cannot hold on to. So the second you're not thinking about or looking at this being, it doesn't exist, which is such a cool idea, but also terrifying. Like, how do you combat something that you literally cannot remember? And the whole book is kind of hinged around this idea of like the ways the government has been trying and maybe failing for longer than we realize to handle this innately forgettable threat. So creepy, the idea of something that is like a threat to humanity and no one can remember it. But there are other types of entities in this book as well, one of which is this contagious idea, like this idea that as soon as you know it, it's basically a death sentence. And this idea is so potent that anyone you're like related to could die from it as well. Crazy stuff, terrifying stuff. Honestly, this is one of the most existentially terrifying things I've ever read, but in the best way. Like, it breaks your brain and it makes you like worried about things that even if they were possible, we would never comprehend. But sometimes I love that type of thing. Some downsides of this book: I didn't feel a super strong emotional attachment to the characters. This is more of a conceptual sci-fi, in my opinion, which I think is fine. Sometimes I like sci-fi that is more about the concepts and the ideas. But also the ending, I feel like by the end, the story unravels a little bit. Some of that I think is intentional because of the whole idea of like not being able to remember the thing you're fighting. Like, there's an inherent unraveling of your sanity and your memory. So I think thematically that's partially intentional by the author. But I think some of the unraveling is not intentional. Some of the unraveling feels like struggling to really pull this narrative to a close in a satisfying way, which, hey, no shade to the author. Like, I don't know how you tie up a story of this nature. So I kind of wish we could have gotten something a little more satisfying from the ending, but I also don't know what that ending could have even been. That being said, you should absolutely go read There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, one of the coolest things I've read in a while. Next, I'm just going to include the entire trilogy, but The Bone Ships is the first book in the Tide Child trilogy by R.J. Barker, and this is such a fun surprise for me. This is a fantasy pirate nautical type setting. The premise is that it's an archipelago with these two warring factions, and their warfare and trade and everything is done via these bone ships. They're made from the bones of these giant Arachesians or sea dragons that have basically been hunted to extinction at this point. And these have special properties that kind of tie into a little bit of a magic system. Like, they have the souls of dead children that like power some of these ships. And anyway, our story follows Joran Twiner, who is the son of like a fisherman who gets in with pirates, and they manage to capture basically a dead bone ship that is no longer fully powered, and they are not supposed to have this bone ship, but they do have it. But Joran Twiner is not a great captain, and he is struggling to hold on to his crew and to keep his command going. And at the beginning of the book, he meets Lucky Mace Gilbrin, who is this brilliant pirate captain who was formerly part of like one of the fleets of the various factions, and she basically takes over and tells Joran Twiner, you can be my second in command because I think I see something in you, but I'm taking over this ship. And she is just the coolest like pirate captain that I've read in a long time. Like, she will go into my list of favorite pirates for sure. Lucky Mace whips Joran and the crew into shape, but through that Joran learns to kind of have discipline and have respect for himself, and he learns to become a leader through the leadership of Lucky Mace and through himself better applying himself and being more, again, disciplined and things like that. And it's so good. I love the characters in this. I love the arc of like this pirate crew becoming more competent and learning to sail their own bone ship. And then the overall plot is dealing with, even though the sea dragons have gone extinct, there has been a giant sea dragon sighted that is following the old migratory paths, and the two various factions are trying to find the sea dragon. And there are political things happening around that. Really cool. This is a very like grim and dark world, and there's so much thought into the various like systems. Like, it feels like a very real world. Like, this is some of the best world building I've read in a long time. It just feels natural, but also very alien. It's really interesting. The first book was my favorite, but I also liked books 2 and 3 a lot. I think the whole trilogy is worth it. And yeah, this was just such a fun surprise. I think R.J. Barker is a totally underrated fantasy author. I hear him mentioned occasionally, but I don't see him mentioned that often. And I think he's one of the best world builders that is currently working. And he, like, his character work and other stuff is great too. You should check out The Bone Ships and the rest of the Tidechild trilogy. Sun Eater. There's no way that this was not in my top 10 for the year. I love the Sun Eater series. And even though I had a few qualms with the ending, there were some things with the pacing in this, and then there are certain things inherently that maybe weren't resolved as satisfyingly as I'd hoped. That is kind of the way of life, and I feel like Christopher Rocchio did mostly do justice to the epic scope of this story that he's been telling, and going on this journey with Hadrian, getting to the very end of book 7, it was emotional. You know, I think one of the things that struck me about this is the first couple of Sun Eater books I had a lot of fun with. I love Rocchio's world building. His prose is really good. Like, he's a great writer. He's so good at like epic set pieces and concepts, and he's so good at like taking all these cool fantasy sci-fi inspirations and making just a really distinct world with them. But I didn't feel the emotional core until like book 3 and then 4. Like, those are the ones where the emotion really started kicking in for me. And by book 7, like, there's multiple characters I'm really sad to see go. I'm really sad that this is over, but I also, again, I love the journey. I think Rocchio writes some of the most epic stuff right now. Like, he's in my top 3 of like just epicness in his stories. Like, there's not many people who can do epic to the level that Rocchio can. And yeah, I'm sad it's over, but I'm glad we got some resolution. I'm curious if he'll ever do anything else in the Sun Eater universe. I know his next series is something totally different. It's fantasy, and I'm here for it. He's proven himself to me to be an incredible author. I loved Sun Eater. I loved Hadrian. I'm sad to see this go. Obviously, you need to have read other books in the series before getting to book 7, but if you've been reading Sun Eater, keep going. Next up is another surprise for me, the Legacy series by Matthew Ward. I read the first book, Legacy of Ash, and the second book, Legacy of Steel. I have not yet read the third book, Legacy of Light. I'm planning to read that before the end of the year, but suffice to say, this is another really underrated series, and I think an underrated author. I've seen Matthew Ward's name here and there, but I don't hear a ton of people talk about him, and I think he also deserves more recognition. This is an epic fantasy series, and it follows multiple nations that are involved in kind of a worldwide conflict. But even with that epic scope, what makes this so good is it really does focus on a couple of key characters in each location, and it really is focusing on their interpersonal dramas, like family dramas and betrayals between loved ones. And it's kind of the Star Wars or the Game of Thrones approach, where you have all this epic stuff happening, but you're also having this intimate drama and betrayal and intrigue and backstabbing. You get that type of stuff in this series, and I really love quite a few of the characters in this. Lovable, cool, interesting, frustrating characters. And then there's some really cool magic in this, and there's this backdrop with divine entities or godlike beings that are kind of maybe pulling the strings and influencing events and giving power to certain people. And that aspect was really fun too. Like, we get some pretty cool fight scenes. This is epic fantasy the way I love it. I would have loved this when I was younger, but it's also good now. Like, this is an adult epic fantasy that's written capably. The character work is good. There's some romance that's well done. There's a lot of action and, again, intrigue, politics, family drama. So good. I highly recommend it. I'm excited to finish the trilogy. And after I finish book 3, I almost certainly will be reading, I think Matthew Ward has a new series that he's writing in, and I will be reading that series at some point too. So check out the Legacy trilogy. If you followed me here or elsewhere, like TikTok or something, you might know how much I love the Dresden Files at this point. One of my favorite series of all time. And this year, we got a new installment in the series after quite a while. I think the last 2 books, Peace Talks and Battleground, came out in, I think, 2020, 2021. So it's been like 5 years since we got the last installment. And prior to those 2 books, it had been like 6 or 7 years from the one before those. I think Jim Butcher is now, he like went through some stuff and he's getting into a place in his life where he's able to write more quickly, which is great because I would love to not be in my 60s or 70s finishing the series like I probably will for some series. I'm looking at you, Stormlight or King Killer. Who am I kidding? I'll be dead. Anyway, this was great. If you haven't read Dresden, go read it. Obviously, you have to read this. You can't, this is like books 18 or something. You can't read this one until you read the other ones. But I am here to tell you that the series is super worth it. It might take you a few books to really get into it. I know people hate hearing that. It's one of the best series ever. That being said, this book is great because it is kind of an interstitial. The last book, Battleground, kind of leveled the playing field, literally, metaphorically. There was so much fallout. So many things have changed from that point that we really needed time to sit with the emotions of the characters, sit with Dresden, and deal with the things that they have been through. And as a reader, like, we're kind of wrung out from the past couple of books. This was a really good opportunity for us to sit with the characters, experience what has happened, and experience 12 months in Dresden's life in the aftermath of the last book's events, which is really, I think, going to help us settle before we ramp back up into the final arc of what is going to be, I think, the end of the Dresden Files, which will be like another 5 or so books. It's going to be more. But this is a calm before the storm type situation. That being said, there are things happening in this book, and there are some really good moments between characters, both fond moments and more tense moments that I think are really great. And if you've been following this, part of what I love so much about Dresden is the cast of characters. Like, I love Harry Dresden, but I love so many of the other characters as much, if not a little bit more even. And so getting to spend time with some of these different people and see where they're at after everything that's happened, oh, it's heartbreaking and beautiful. And I loved the end of this book. I loved the time we got with these characters as we gear up for what will be the conclusion, the multi-book conclusion of the Dresden Files. One of the most recent books I finished is No One Gets Out Alive by Adam Neville. Neville is one of those authors. This is a floppy book. Floppy books are great to read. They hold themselves open, but they're not great to display standing up while filming, in case you were wondering. Adam Neville is one of the few authors that really can get under my skin. Give me that sense of like looking over my shoulder. I'm always creeped out reading his books in general, but especially at night, which usually I don't mind reading horror at night. Like, books don't tend to scare me that much. Adam Neville's one of those authors where I don't often like to read his books at night because it's so creepy. He's so good at being creepy. You might recognize him because he wrote The Ritual, which is maybe his most famous work. That has a movie adaptation. That might be part of why. I haven't read The Ritual yet, but I read Last Days, which is another one of his novels, and that is one of the scariest books I think I've ever read. One of his issues tends to be that his books are pretty long. Like, No One Gets Out Alive is like 600 and some pages. It's pretty long, and Last Days, I think, might have been even a little bit longer than that. And so, maybe there's a bit of a pacing thing. I sometimes feel like his stories could be just a touch shorter. But at the same time, part of what works so well is he writes pretty good characters, I think, and he lets you live with the characters for long enough that you get really invested in them, and it gets really tense by the end of the book because you've been with the characters for a while. He's really good at just giving you this creeping sense of dread and this building foreboding, this tense just pit in your stomach of things are off. And he really capitalizes on that through the entire book. And then by the end, it's kind of explosive and stuff happens. And I think it's worth it. I think it's really worth it. The premise of this particular story is this young woman, Stephanie, is down on her luck. She just broke up with her boyfriend. And she's like 19, like she's pretty young, maybe 20, and she doesn't have much money. She can't go back home. Her dad passed away. Her stepmom's terrible, and she has a terrible part-time job, and so she doesn't have enough money yet to actually get her own place. So in the meantime, while she's saving up some money, she rents a small room in this really creepy rundown house in Birmingham from this man named Knacker McGuire. Knacker is just the weaseliest man you'll ever meet. He is such a well-written character because he's so weaselly and just detestable. And you've met people like him to an extent, and Neville just does such a good job bringing him to life. And he's a hateable character, but in such a like realistic way. Like in the way he's like Joffrey Baratheon, and he's nothing like Joffrey Baratheon, but he's like Joffrey Baratheon in the sense of just like, oh my God, I hate you, but you're so well done. Like you are written so effectively. That's how Knacker McGuire is in this book. And he's just a sleazy guy, but there's also something off about him and the house and the situation. And immediately from the get-go, we know Stephanie should not be in the situation and that she should get out of there right away. To Neville's credit, I think he does a good job of like having her sort of attempt to get away and then things continuing to go wrong. And her circumstances do kind of trap her in this situation in a way that I think is kind of believable. And even though there are times where you're like, no, don't fall for this or that, she doesn't have a lot of options. And I don't know. I thought it was believable enough, even though she didn't make good decisions all the time. Her situation was so fraught that like, what was she gonna do, you know? He puts her really in between a rock and a hard place, and this book is like, you know, the hard place for sure. Anyway, I don't want to say too much more. The house, there's more going on. Besides Knacker being a sleazy weirdo, the house is haunted, probably. It seems like the first night she's there, something seems off. She thinks she's hearing ghosts. Something is off about this place. And then throughout the story, this story kind of takes a turn later in the book that I think was unexpected for me, but really worked. And I don't want to say what it is. Maybe I think I'll do a full review of this book at some point with a spoiler section, because I really want to talk about it. And I really liked it. I've heard some people that didn't like how this book ended, like the last third of this book. I like what this book did because I think thematically it really pays some things off. It pays off this idea of trauma, like this girl and what she goes through. It really does like communicate the trauma she goes through in a way that I think is really effective. It also deals with some very difficult subjects. Like there is assault of various kinds without getting too graphic for YouTube. Like look at the trigger warnings. There are things that happen in this book that would be very triggering, and it deals with very heavy subject matter, but I think it does it in a way that doesn't feel gratuitous or voyeuristic. Like it does feel like it's shocking and awful, but I think it's written in a way that is meant to be the horror of it, but also what Stephanie has to live through and how she, like the trauma she deals with from like the horrors of this house. I think it is pretty well done. Anyway, look up, if you want to read this, but you're sensitive to things like that, look up some of the trigger stuff. But I think it's pretty well done. And I think the end of this book really shows the author highlighting the trauma. And I think sometimes you have these like horrifying things characters go through in fiction, and then they're just, you know, a happy ending, quote unquote. And I think this is a book that is really good at showing, even past a certain point, you don't recover from certain things. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this. This book was great. Adam Neville is quickly becoming one of my all-time favorite horror authors. For spooky season, I'm going to read at least one more of his books. If you have not read Neville, this or Last Days, they're both really scary. It's hard to say which one's scarier. They're scary in different ways, but yeah. All right. Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez is another horror novel. This is a little bit more literary. Not that Adam Neville's books don't have literary merit, but this is more literary in like a genre sense of like it's doing some more literary type devices and stuff like that. Maybe is a little bit more ambiguous in some ways too. Like it leaves things to your interpretation in some areas. That being said, this is still very much a horror novel. It's a well-written one, and it's also creepy. This is about a man and his son, Juan and Gaspar Peterson, and Juan's wife, Gaspar's mother, has unexpectedly passed away. And this book starts with Juan and his son traveling from Buenos Aires to rural Argentina, where Juan's late wife's family and ancestral home is. I gotta say, Juan has maybe the worst in-laws in all of human history. His late wife's family are part of this really weird cult, like a dark, creepy cult in all the cultiest senses. There are weird rituals and rites and just this really creepy stuff happening. Juan has some special abilities that tie him to this organization, even though he doesn't want to be. And his son is starting to manifest some abilities too. And so he's worried that they're going to try and take his son for basically magical, ritualistic purposes for the cult. And he's trying to protect his son and stop this from happening. That's kind of the initiating stuff of the plot. Overall, this is a family drama. We kind of follow Juan and Gaspar as Gaspar gets a little older through some of the years. And then we also kind of jump back a little bit and we see Juan in his younger years as he meets his late wife when they were kids and then growing up and getting together. And this is kind of like a multi-generational saga. We also get a little bit of the family history of Juan's late wife, Rosaria, and their whole family and how this cult was formed. And that was some fascinating and dark stuff. There are some moments in this book that are truly chilling and just will be forever like emblazoned in my memory. And this has some really creepy moments for sure. I will say about at the 3/4 mark of this book, it started to slow down a little bit. We had a flashback sequence that I felt like went on maybe a little longer than I was enjoying. And I feel like we focused a little bit too much on certain parts of the story at times. And there were other parts of the story that I wish we had gotten more expounded more and we had seen more of those things happening. And it's a fine line because I think part of what works so well for the horror is in the mystery is like what is happening with this cult. The not knowing is part of the fear. So you don't want everything to be outlined, I think. But at the same time, there are some things where I do wish we had gone a little bit deeper with those things than we did. That being said, the ending was still pretty great. I liked the way this tied up. It made sense with the setup of the story and the characters and everything. And yeah, very powerful literary novel, some great horror sequences. I'm excited to read more of Mariana Enriquez's work in the future. If you like literary stuff and you want something that's literary and a bit creepy, this is it. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is a modern classic from the 1930s. Alfred Hitchcock made a movie adaptation of this. This book is great. This is about a young woman named Rebecca who marries a mysterious, wealthy older man named Maxim de Winter, who has this giant estate on the Cornish coast. And so when she marries him, kind of quickly, they go back to Manderley. That's the name of his estate. And Manderley is this really great setting. Like if you think about some of your favorite locations in fiction, whether it's the Shire or Hogwarts or places where there's just a distinct feel to the location, Manderley is one of those places. This man, Maxim de Winter, he is a very kind of aloof and a bit cold of a person. And meanwhile, as Rebecca is trying to acclimate to her new home, there are kind of fragments of Rebecca, Maxim's late wife, in a way that almost feels like her presence still lingers, almost as if the house is haunted with memories of Rebecca. But of course, Maxim doesn't want to talk a lot about it. It's very traumatic. He's not a very talkative person about those types of things. And there definitely seems to be things going on related to Rebecca. And this book is very much the unfolding of the mystery of who was Rebecca, what happened, what is going on at Manderley. And it was also beautifully done. I love the characters. I love the plot. I loved the atmosphere. This is such a great ride. Highly recommend Rebecca. I finally read one of Toni Morrison's books. Obviously, Toni Morrison is one of the most lauded authors in American history, and rightly so. This was her debut novel, The Bluest Eye, and it is incredible how good she is. Like, Morrison is one of those writers where she crafts sentences again and again, where you have to stop and reread the sentence multiple times and be like, I cannot believe someone wrote that. But at the same time, that sentence, of course, it has to exist. It captures something quintessentially true. And she is so good at that. And it's just so beautifully written. Despite the subject matter being very heavy, this is about a young black girl named Piccola who wishes she had blue eyes more than anything. And this is a book about self-loathing and about beauty standards and the way society uses loathing of people and communities and uses things like racism to enforce these types of oppressive things on the community, and it's destructive for everybody. In this case, people dealing with racism, like I think this is in the 50s, and it's really extreme and horrible, and you can see how that type of loathing can kind of have a cascading effect to the point where this young girl hates who she is, and the way people make her life and her family's life miserable because of this prejudice and bigotry, and then also like what this does to like the whole community. And it's tragic. Trigger warnings for this one too. Like there's some pretty heavy stuff in this book, but Morrison writes so deftly and beautifully that she will make you think about it and will strike emotional chords within you. And she just makes you think, but also like gives it in such a beautifully written way that I can't help but recommend this. And I'm excited to read more of Morrison's work eventually. White Noise by Don DeLillo. This is a novel from the 1980s that is kind of making a critique of modern day life and the way we kind of live in this veneer of capitalism and this mundane life where we live in our little neighborhood and we go to the grocery store and we buy products that are put on display for us, and it kind of questions the meaninglessness of everything in this capitalist system that is meant to just extract value from us, with corporations that don't care about anything but our money, and governments that are keeping us in the dark about, while doing all of these things. And, you know, we sort of don't have the agency we like to believe we have, and we're fed this little delusion of the American dream. And this was written in the 80s in a way that I think was a good critique then, and that I think that totally fits now. Like, if anything, these things have gotten worse, and so I think a lot of the themes DeLillo plays with are more relevant than ever, and I deeply felt so many things in this book. It's really funny at times, like this made me laugh out loud multiple times, which it's rare that I actually physically laugh at a book. I did a couple of times at this, but it's also profound at times and a little sad. There's some existential, like there are moments where this book is kind of existential and like not quite nihilistic, but maybe a little bit at times. But it's really good. It's so good. DeLillo is another, I think, great American author, and he's one that I think if you are well versed in like the literary world, I'm sure you've heard of him. But if you're not super versed in that, you might not have heard of DeLillo. But I think he's good enough that like he should be in some of these conversations for the great American novelists. He's up there for sure. And this is just I hate to use the word tour de force because it feels like the thing you say, but it kind of felt like that. This book, not super long, this blew me away. He's such a good writer. I can't wait to read more. He has multiple other books. From what I hear, a lot of his books are very different. Either way, White Noise is great. Some of the best prose I've ever read. Like Morrison. Between Morrison and DeLillo, just tons of great quality prose and craftsmanship. You should check these out. For sure. There's also a White Noise movie with Adam Driver, which I was initially excited about because I like Adam Driver. But the movie was not great. I didn't finish it. I don't recommend the movie. I do highly recommend the book. So there you have it. Those are the 10 best books that I've read so far in 2026 with a couple honorable mentions. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of them. I could talk about any of these all day. And maybe I'll do some deep dives on a few of these at some point, like I mentioned. But I'd also love to hear some of your favorite recent reads. And yeah, thanks again for watching. Thanks for being here. One of these days, I'm going to think of a really cool outro.